Now, though, it is time to turn to things legal. And Andrew Eborn joins me now, who's a barrister and broadcaster. I'm not going to put you on the spot, Andrew, and ask you if you've ever had a... But if you've got anything to confess, now's the time.
I never work, Pedri. My whole life is just one long holiday. So the whole idea
that
of
is such
like
a dodge. That is a barrister dodge, isn't it?
Have you ever?
No, I've snogged somebody inappropriately, drunk, but no, I tend to, people in my business are weird. So
they are weird. It's a weird business, isn't it? This business that we call show.
I think my producer's about to walk out. Everybody else is down the tools, but there you go. Because do you know what? Being a presenter means that you spend most of your working time at work in the studio, live, so you don't really meet anyone. You really don't.
I think that's the problem. And I think that's the problem. This is why so many romances happen at work. And people are working more and more. I mean, fortunately, I'm in a wonderful relationship and no longer need to do the whole dating thing, which was done several years ago. But it's a nightmare now for people. I don't know how people meet anymore because they're all basically putting their heads into their screens and so on and so forth. If they go out to work, they work so many long hours and then go home and just collapse in a heap.
Yeah, so that's where they meet people, and that was one of the things working from home. There was concern that would, if you're working from home, those workplace romances, that 43% of them that end in marriage, just not going to happen. So
I think that is quite extraordinary. We're going to talk about this in a bit about AI, but I presented a show for Togo Broadcast Systems, which was the people behind Ninja Warriors and Takeshi's Castle, with Love by AI. And what they do with the AI will basically tell you what to say to people on a date, what to wear, the wonderful trigger points and so on and so forth. But the trouble is you've got your head buried in this screen telling you how you should behave.
Yeah.
No, it works. It works.
Thank you.
But I love the principle. It's got to be good.
Yeah, it's got to be good. Right, well, let's talk about a form of AI now. ChatGPT. A lawyer has had to apologise.
Oh, yes, isn't this glorious? As you know, I'm probably the world's biggest advocate for artificial intelligence and embracing that. But basically, a lawyer who relied on ChatGPT prepared a court filing. In this particular case was Roberto Matta, and he was suing the Colombian airline Avianca, and he was alleging that a metal food and beverage cart injured his knee when he was on a flight to Kennedy International Airport in New York. And Avianca, the airlines, basically said, look, it's out of time, it's statute of limitation applied. But Matta's lawyer submitted a brief, and it contained a number of references about why this case should be. They cited the cases such as Martinez versus Delta Airlines, Zickerman versus Korea Airlines, and Varghese versus China Southern Airlines, and told the court you should look at these cases which would allow my client to succeed. The problem is each and every one of those cases, which was suggested by ChatGPT, was made up. They were completely fictitious. And the court said, hang about, this is complete rubbish. There are no such cases. So what's happened is Judge Castell has set a hearing basically regarding the legal snafu for June the 8th and has ordered the particular law firm to appear before them and to say why they shouldn't be sanctioned. So this is one of the warnings about ChatGPT. And it's what they
the lawyer didn't even bother to read it.
And the problem is that ChatGPT makes it up.
But the lawyer...
Well, the trouble is they did read it, but they didn't bother to research it further. They took it at face value.
So the AI churned out some fake case law, some fake cases.
Yes, it's completely fake. And this is what's happened. And this is one of the limitations of AI at the moment. It doesn't like to admit that it doesn't know. It's rather like politicians. And they are. There's a phrase for it called hallucinations. And we've had a couple of cases of this. A US law professor was falsely accused of sexually harassing a student. Completely false. There was an Australian mayor who was claimed to have been imprisoned for bribery, and that was completely false. But what's happening now is that things are improving all of the time. And
Do you know what, Andrew? I'm going to have to stop you.
Boss is a huge advocate of embracing AI to basically reduce...
Andrew, we're going to have to call you back on your phone because whatever it is that you're using, that AI isn't working. So what we'll do is we'll call you straight back. And let's hope it's a better line. I do apologise for that, but technology... They're talking about AI taking over the world. Can't even get a blooming phone call right. Or whatever that was on. I don't know what that was on. But is Andrew there now? Hello. All right, there you go. You're back with
me.
Hello,
can you hear me now?
That's better. I was going to say, AI is taking over the world. You can't even get a good line into a studio. So they just hallucinate. The AI just refuses to say, I don't know.
Exactly. So there are these hallucinations, and as I mentioned, AI's made certain things up. So the US law professor was falsely accused of sexual harassment. There was an Australian mayor who was falsely claimed to have been imprisoned for bribery and so on and so forth. And so Geoffrey Voss, who's the master of the rolls, he's a big advocate, as indeed am I, for embracing AI. And what he's sort of done is sort of turn around and say, look, we should do this because it will maximize and make court cases much more efficient because they can assemble all sorts of and disseminate all sorts of information and precedents accordingly. And there's a wonderful particular product called Co-Counsel from a company called Casetext. And what that does, it basically, where they don't know the answer, it's basically said the chatbot will tell you, look, actually, I don't know the answer on this one, and therefore it reduces the risk of hallucination. But it's a good warning for everybody out there, is don't take the first thing that ChatGPT tells you, question everything.
Yeah, well, let's have a look at copyright now. Andy Warhol and Prince and the Supreme Court ruling. This is about AI-generated images.
Well, what's happened here, it's Lynn Goldsmith, who's a US professional photographer. She's won an enormous 6-year copyright court case against the Andy Warhol Foundation, AWF. And what this is, it was basically Goldsmith preemptively was sued by AWF in 2017 after she alerted the foundation to a copyright infringement of her photograph of Prince, which she did in 1981 whilst on an assignment for Newsweek. And in 1984, Vanity Fair paid $400, the princely sum of that, and an artist credit for a one-off license to basically, for an artist, they didn't say who it was, to create an illustration based on that photograph. Well, the artist happened to be Andy Warhol, and the images of Prince flooded social media in 2016 when Prince sadly died. And basically, when Goldsmith discovered that Warhol had created his 16 prints based on her picture, she sued and basically claimed a huge amount of damages. In the States, they have these system about sort of whether it's fair use and so on and so forth. The court has sort of turned around and say, actually, no, she as the photographer had the right to control how that particular photograph is used. And as a result, she has won this case. It's been dragging on for ages and ages and ages. But basically, use of other people's copyright work requires an appropriate license. And in this case, an appropriate license wasn't given, and therefore she won her case.
Good. I'm all for artists winning cases like that because, for me, if it's my voice that gets out there, or, I've agreed to a voiceover for one thing and it gets used for another, it absolutely drives me nuts, and it's so unfair because once you've given it over, there is no control.
And it gets worse than that, Pepsi, because what's happening now is that obviously AI can replicate your voice. Yeah. And we've had a case of that. You might remember retired actor James Earl Jones, who played Darth Vader.
Yes.
Had his voice was recreated from archive materials for the Disney released Star Wars spin-off, Obi-Wan Kenobi, and it used what's called Respeech's AI technology to replicate his voice. In that instance, his voice, he actually licensed his voice to be used. And we had a similar thing with Bruce Willis, who sadly was basically unable to act again due to aphasia, which affects his speech, and a deep fake of his face as well as his voice was used basically to in an advertisement for the Russian telecoms company Megaphone, and that again was under license. Now that is going to be the way of the future. I always talk about embracing AI and the wonderful possibilities, but it does need to make sure that copyright law and various other things catch up with that. So you can basically ensure that there's a business model where you can earn money in your sleep. You don't need to rush to those studios and have those office affairs. You can stay at home in your pajamas.
And earn money while your voice, you know, if they get an AI to do a programme, mind you, I'd miss it. But, COVID-19 inquiry and WhatsApp messages. Now, I thought the whole point of WhatsApp is that it is end-to-end encrypted and private,
yes.
and I delete mine on a regular basis. Not that I'm saying anything remarkable at all, but I delete them on a regular basis anyway. So what's the stuff on this?
The issue here is that they're being asked for this COVID inquiry to see all of Boris Johnson's WhatsApp messages, and it's history repeating itself. It might sound familiar. You might remember a certain Matt Hancock got in.
Well, he handed his over to a journalist.
Isabel, yes. A very good journalist who works for a wonderful broadcast organisation not too far from your studio. And what happened in that instance, it all became public. Now, I've always said that whatever you write, whatever you say, work on the basis it's going to end up in the hands of people you least want it to. And I always say that disinfectant, basically sunlight, is the best disinfectant. So he needs to reveal all of these WhatsApp messages, and there is an interesting legal.
But what about privacy? I mean, if his WhatsApp messages are between him and his wife, or I mean, look, I've got no time for the fella, but there is such a thing as privacy and private conversation, and no sunlight isn't the best thing for that.
Well, and it does depend, and you are absolutely right. It does depend on what the content is, and it's very difficult to know what you don't know if you don't see it. And in terms of copyright, and this is one protection that you get when you write messages, and you might remember good old Meghan Markle and the copyright that she had in her letter to her father. That was one of the key aspects to it. But the question is, what do these WhatsApp messages say? And unless you have a look at them, you don't really know. But also, normally you as the writer of a message in your private capacity would own the copyright in it. The difference comes if you do something in the course of your employment. And if it's in the course of your employment, then actually your employer owns the copyright.
So if I send a WhatsApp to a friend from my desk in the newsroom, that belongs to my employer?
Well, it depends if that's in the course of your employment. If you say, join me on the Petri Hoskins show, the lines of communication are superb tonight. We can hear you very clearly. And it's something to do with your show, then that would be in the course of your employment. That's the test. If it's just a private, what are we going to do for dinner tonight because I want this office romance, it's got nothing to do with my employment, then that's a completely private matter. The difficulty is that it doesn't pass the smell test, does it? If you're withholding information, people think, well, you might.
But he might have deleted them, and then what? Well, I mean, if I was him, I'd have said, look, I've deleted them all. They've all gone. Shut up. Go away.
He's apparently saying he doesn't have a problem with it. I think some people are a bit worried about the revelations, because obviously there are more than two people taking part in these conversations. And WhatsApp, by its very nature, is not like sitting down and formally writing a letter. So the language will be very different. It might be a bit flippant sometimes and so on and so forth. So it won't look good, but I think you need to, like most of these things, you need to own the narrative. And owning the narrative means, absolutely, these are WhatsApp messages. Do bear in mind they're probably very informal, and as a result, put that into that sort of context. But I have nothing to hide. There's a much
well, you don't try and come after my messages, because even though I've got nothing to hide, I have the right to privacy, and that's always been my argument. And people go, we've got nothing to hide, you've got nothing to fear. I think that is a really bogus argument, to be honest, Andrew. I've always thought that was a bogus argument, because I think that if you are a private citizen and you've got nothing to hide, the whole point is you don't have to. You shouldn't have to. And therefore, just sod off. Would be my response. Let's cash. The government has agreed to a requirement for banks to provide customers with free access to cash. Now, this is because those machines, the hole in the wall, the banks have wanted to charge us to take out our own cash for ages.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is all about banks closing down and so on and so forth. And the government figures confirm there are more than 2 million over 70s who do not access the internet. So basically, we're prejudiced. There's a prejudice against people who are not in the digital age.
I think cash is great anyway. I want cash. I'd like
Absolutely.
Like
cash is king and queen. You've got to work on that basis. But there is now, it's going to be enshrined in law, a requirement for banks to provide customers with convenient free access, not free cash, but free access to cash.
Yeah, they're not going to like that. Watch your interest rate go down or your savings rate go down. Or
got to pay for it.
They'll make us pay for it one way or the other. Andrew, thank you so much. Absolutely brilliant. Really, really interesting stuff. Thank you. Andrew Eborn there going through the latest and greatest legal bits of news, the barrister and broadcaster. Right, stay where you are. We're talking films next.